Good afternoon. I am Leslie Hall. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the director of HRC's HBCU Leadership Summit. Thank you for joining us today for the inaugural episode of Equalitalks, delivering on the promise of equity and inclusion. We will be joined by President of HRC, Alphonso David, and Dillard University's President, Walter Kimbrough. Before they appear for the fireside chat, we will begin with a video so that you can learn more about HRC's HBCU program. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Seeing all the queer and beautiful Blackness that was the summit, it was just such a beautiful and amazing experience.
It was definitely an amazing experience that I'm never going to forget.
It gave us a lot of hope.
In the Black community, you are the only gay kid, and in the gay community, you're the only Black kid. And that is another just dynamic that you have to navigate.
I believe that the problems of LGBTQ students can be invisible, and then there's still the family pressure too. Sometimes there's going to be an unease with having those conversations about how do we have an inclusive campus.
My story really started at 13. And I came out to my parents. Something that still kind of hurts me to this day is when my dad told me, he was like, they would actually have to let the person that they wanted me to be and the person that they thought I was die.
I was 5 when I realized I wasn't a cis boy. I identify as trans and queer. I came out very publicly. We had a convocation with Alice Walker, and we got to ask questions. And so I said, I'm a trans man, and everyone's like, Immediately after that, people are on Twitter like, I don't know if I feel comfortable with a trans man at Spelman. I kind of just felt like on the outside of everything.
The HRC HBCU Leadership Summit is an annual convening of LGBTQ students attending HBCUs across the country. Each year, we bring close to 40 students. That number is growing. There's no other space like it.
The setting that the summit created was specifically for us to be Black and queer. In most settings, we're not allowed to be both.
I've never been in a room with so many people like myself.
Everyone I met is so incredible. We kind of like formed a bond that we didn't have anywhere else.
And you all are accepting me, and you all don't even know me.
At the summit, I definitely felt like I belonged, like from day one.
The summit is our hallmark leadership development program. Students that are able to be their real selves and lead from a place of authenticity are able to do more. This program changes lives.
I think, it's really just having that experience to really be validated in a way that I don't think they had ever been validated. I think it empowered them, helped them understand what kind of role they could play as a leader on our campus to address issues.
Things that I do now are gonna be better for the future. So I think like the freshmen, the sophomores, they're gonna like reap what we sow.
Having such a safe space where we could all be our complete selves and just be unabashedly Black and queer in a setting in which we know that we'll be accepted is so important just for our own personal survival and to rejuvenate the passion we have for the fight, to remind ourselves why we're doing this.
I feel very hopeful for my generation. From the leaders that I've met there, I see a lot of change, and I'm happy and I'm ready for it.
Welcome, everyone. Leslie, thank you so much for all of your work with and the support of HBCUs throughout the country. Hello, everyone. My name is Alphonso David, and I am the president of the Human Rights Campaign. The Human Rights Campaign is the largest LGBTQ civil rights organization in the country and around the globe. We're working to ensure that LGBTQ people achieve equality under law and in all aspects of their lives. One of the many programs we advance at the Human Rights Campaign is our Historically Black Colleges and Universities program, which is led by Leslie Hall. The program mobilizes and supports HBCUs in enhancing policies and services that promotes excellence in LGBTQ inclusion, equity, and engagement. We focus on promoting individual competencies and collective action, empowering leaders and stakeholders, and building a network of committed leaders in pursuit of eliminating stigma and enriching the college experience for LGBTQ students and the entire student body. I would like to note that our HBCU program receives generous support from funders, and specifically the David Bonnet Foundation and the Coca-Cola Foundation. With the support we have received over the years, we're able to grow and expand this program. But the growth and expansion of this program would not be possible without colleges and universities and the leaders on the ground who are committed to creating a path of inclusion and acceptance. And today, I'm so pleased to be joined by one of those leaders, Dr. Walter Kimbrough, who is helping us expand the scope and the impact of our HBCU program. Dr. Kimbrough is the president of Dillard University in New Orleans, Louisiana. He is the 7th president of that storied institution. Dr. Kimbrough has been recognized for his research and his writings on HBCUs and Black men in college. He was also named in 2013 as NBC News and the Groats 100 African American Making History Today, joining another impressive group. Dr. Kimbrough was named Male HBCU President of the Year in 2014 by HBCU Digest. He lives with his wife and 2 children. Dr. Kimbrough, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So I want to just dive right in. I have a number of questions for you.
Okay.
We, both of us, are sitting here as 2 Black presidents of large institutions. I wonder, from your perspective, as president of an HBCU, what does it mean to lead right now when we are in the midst of a global pandemic that is disproportionately affecting our Black community, and when we're seeing a national awakening, an urgency, some would say, for racial justice?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I've heard people talk about these 2 pandemics that we're dealing with. So you have the COVID-19 pandemic, and you also have this ever-present pandemic of racism. And so we had the first that we were dealing with, which particularly for HBCUs, I've done interviews and talked about that the calculus for us has been really challenging going into the fall. You have a disease that disproportionately impacts African Americans, part of it because we have the health disparities and the comorbidities. So that's a part of the challenge. And so a lot of schools right now are trying to figure out, can we open safely in the fall, knowing that we serve a population that is disproportionately impacted by this disease? But on the other side of that, it also helps us think about that when we talk about going online, for some people, there is no online. In the state of Louisiana, 30% of families don't have internet access. So how do you go online? You don't have solid housing or food. And so you have students who are reaching out saying, I got to come back to school because I can't stay here. A young man from Chicago is emailing me saying, look, it's safer there than it is here in Chicago. And so you're balancing that. So you have that. And then you add this layer on top of that where people have been shuttered inside their houses. And then we watch the George Floyd video. I mean, it brought me back to Rodney King. I was early 20s when that happened. I remember just staying up all night and watching that and all those kinds of things that happened. But this was different because we watched this man die like we had not seen anyone else die. We've seen people shot, it's quick, those kinds of things happen. But for, almost 9-minute period of time, we're watching this. So for me, Generation X, it reminds me of Spike Lee's School Days. I mean, Do the Right Thing. Do the Right Thing. We watched Radio Raheem and the police choking him and he can't breathe. And you got the people on the side saying, you're killing them. That's what it was, life imitating art, years later. And I watched Spike Lee even talk about this. So I think then for a lot of young people, that just added, I'm struggling. I see the comorbidities. I see the disparity. And now we got this on top of that. And so now you're dealing with, people who are dealing with all these issues at the same time, and it makes it tough. So we're trying to be sensitive to that. I think for us being an HBCU, there is a level of support because I'm watching students all across the country engaging in protests, which is great. And they're sending us the pictures like I was here, I was in Madison, Wisconsin, and Little Rock and Fort Worth. And so we can validate that. We can, celebrate that they're out there because now this is giving them a chance to say, I've been feeling helpless with COVID. Maybe I can do something about this. So it provides, I think, opportunities. It's bringing up issues that have existed that I don't think we talk about enough. We don't talk enough about health disparities. We need to going forward. We probably don't talk enough about this pandemic of racism. I think we'll talk more about it now that we're having this national reckoning on racism now too. So it's been an interesting time. I just told people we need to lean into it, not something to be afraid of, but it's an opportunity. So that's the way I look at it.
So this opportunity that we now have to really dig deeper into racial justice and racial equality, we also are working to make sure that LGBTQ people are treated equally. How do you see the fight for LGBTQ equality tied to the fight for racial equity, if at all? And if there is a connection, how do we bridge these movements for more effective impact and even more of a greater impact? Why might it be difficult for some people, some folks, to see these connections? And then how do you think we bridge that divide? How do you think we create those coalitions moving forward?
Okay. Yeah, you want me to solve the world right now.
I am trying, and you are well positioned to do it.
No, it's always been, I think being Black in America with all of these intersectionalities, it creates challenges for us sometimes. So we hear people say we get more upset when a young Black man gets murdered. Not so much if it's a Black woman. If they're trans, nothing at all. And we're trying to figure out like what's more important to us. There is a documentary that I've used for my class by Byron Hurt that came out about a decade ago. And in it, Beverly Guy Sheftall, who is a professor at Spelman, talks about how, Black people are more concerned about racism than we might be about sexism, misogyny, homophobia. And so for us, I think sometimes it's sort of hard to say, what do we focus on when all these things intersect? And it's sort of like, okay, let's just focus on the police brutality piece of it and not deal with these other things, but they all intersect. So I think it becomes complicated because I think then people feel like, well, if we start talking about this, does it dilute the message? So, I mean, you have people doing Black Lives Matter marches, but then you have people doing Black Trans Lives Matter marches as well. So it's not like we could see them all as a unified message. I think people feel like, well, our message is getting lost in the broader picture, which sometimes I think it does. So I think it's tough because there is this intersectionality, these different issues and layers of issues, and we're trying to figure out how do we go about addressing them. I don't have the answer. I don't know how. I don't think we've ever done it systematically in this country. I think we're moving now to be able to openly talk about LGBTQ issues in a way that we didn't even 30 years ago or 40 years ago. I think we're making progress. You're having people bring those issues to life in a way that when I was a kid, nobody would have talked about at all. You just wouldn't have had those conversations. A conversation like this would not have happened. You wouldn't have had an HBCU president having this kind of conversation because we were, and I think we're going to talk about this later. We're very conservative institutions, a lot of the church influence, and it just is not what we did. So I think we're moving, but I don't think we figured out how to deal with all these intersectionalities. And so that's got to be a part of the work that can we move these issues forward collectively and no one feel like, well, my issue is not being addressed, so I need to go do my own thing. I don't, so we've got to figure out how to do that together. So it's not just one issue that drives it. And then the other things are sort of just hanging on, which I think now probably feels that way and probably is that way.
Well, let's focus just for a minute on your personal journey. Dr. Kimbrough, you are a straight Black man leading an HBCU in the South, and you've been doing this for more than 20 years. You're also leading Dillard's LGBTQ inclusion work, and you have decided to prioritize that work. You've said that you want Dillard to be among the first group of HBCUs to participate in HRC Seal of Excellence, which will launch in early 2021. So can you talk a little bit about your journey and why you have such a clear position on LGBTQ inclusion?
So I think I grew up like most Black boys in Atlanta in the 1970s and early 80s. I had, very limited understanding of what it meant for someone to be gay. I grew up where we're little kids in the street and you weaponize language. If we wanted to play football, and I remember there was a family, these 3 brothers that would play. And if the youngest didn't want to play, we would always say, oh, he's being a sissy, those kinds of things. That was natural for us to do. That was how we tried to weaponize it to guilt him. We need another person to play football. Why won't you play? Which is interesting too, because when you watch that family as it developed, the brother that played the most, who was the most active, was actually the brother who was gay. So it was, it's like when you go back and you realize it's like, that was the brother who was always playing, so it was, we weren't enlightened at that point in time, going to college, joining the fraternity, and the Black fraternity system is, very traditional fraternity and sorority system as a whole, very traditional gender roles. So we operated in that same way, particularly being a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. There was a stereotype for a period of time because these were viewed as smart people that they were gay. So people would say, oh, this is gay Phi gay. And so then you saw chapters in trying to run from that. And then I think to our detriment, I think we tried to create some kind of thug image to run away from that. And I was like, no, it's okay to be the smart dudes. Why are we running from that? But we started to run from it. So just very unenlightened. My experience, and I think about this because I have a very clear seminal moment for me. I was in grad school at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and we had a student cultures class. And for the semester, we had to immerse ourselves in a student culture that was very different from us. Miami's like less than 5% Black. So I was the only Black person in my cohort. So everybody else is choosing Black groups to go spend a semester with. And I'm just like, well, man, what do I do? It's like, what group is very different from me? And I said, well, they have an active LGBTQ group, so maybe I should do that. And that was a step for me to even put myself in that, because I was like, and so we had a partner that we partnered with. So there was a white woman. So the 2 of us, I remember going to their first meeting. We had to present to say, this is our project for the class, what we want to do. And they said, all right, they let us present. They were like, all right, y'all wait outside and we'll tell you what we decide. And I'm like, what do you mean I got to wait outside? So I got attitude now. I'm just like, I'm putting myself out here. This is already uncomfortable. And now y'all are making me wait. That was the best semester I've ever had, just in terms of really spending time with students who were very different from me to have a different perspective. And I think that really opened up my eyes to say, man, you got to grow as a person. It doesn't have anything with you. You got to grow as a person. And so, I finished that. I started working at Emory. Emory started its first office of gay, lesbian, bisexual life. And I was on the committee. Now that was controversial at Emory. Emory is United Methodist related. The president at the time was United Methodist minister. I'm a United Methodist minister's kid too. So it was, controversial, but I was a part of that process from the beginning. So my experience at Miami, I think, provided that framework for me. It really was the best learning experience I've had, because I really had to go spend time with students who, initially I was uncomfortable. That was a world that was unknown to me. I hadn't had any real experience. When I think back about it, there were people who were meaningful in my life who were gay. We just never talk about it. Like my homeroom teacher, we just loved him, but it didn't bother you. It was just sort of like, well, that's just Mr. Clark. But I think that experience for me helped set a framework for me that I'm very thankful that I had that experience. So it's very clear. I can see it like it was yesterday. Very seminal experience for me. That was important.
So you talk about enlightenment, and you talk about how important being enlightened has led you to make choices and advance policies that are important to create welcoming and inclusive places for LGBTQ students, for faculty, for other staff. Right. So the question I have for you is, can this work that we've been talking about at HBCUs to create inclusive spaces, can this work really move forward without formalized policies and a commitment from someone like you as a leader?
I think it can, not so much because I don't like to focus as much on the policy piece. I think it's, for me, how do I create a campus culture and climate that moves those things forward. I mean, lots of people have policies that are written that people don't ever look at. So you got a policy, but it's just sort of there. It's on a piece of paper. It's not living. So I mean, the parallel would be my colleagues who are presidents of majority institutions who are sort of dreading this fall, because if they do have in-person classes, they know that there are going to be people protesting all kinds of things. And what they've normally done is they've gone out and hired some Black person or other person of color to be the chief diversity officer. They give them a nice title. They pay them well. They have no office staff, no money to do anything. And it's just sort of like, boom. And I'm like, no, you're the president. You're the chief diversity officer. Okay. It's the same thing for me. I can say, let's have a, inclusive environment on campus and let somebody else do that and then act like I don't have anything to do with it. No, that's my job too. So I have to model that. It's, and it doesn't have to be big pronouncements. It's certain things like we have faculty staff institute every beginning of every semester. So then one of those semesters after I think I came back from one of the summer institutes, I had a professor at the University of Alabama who's written a lot about HBCUs and LGBTQ. He was one of my opening speakers at the Faculty Staff Institute. So you got a room of captive faculty and staff, someone saying, that's how I show that I'm committed to it. It's not just, it's, the people that you bring to the campus, the speakers and that kind of thing, that you do those kinds of things, how you interact with your gay and lesbian and bisexual students on campus in a meaningful way. You're modeling that behavior for people. So for me, I think you can have some policies. I don't like to get so caught in policies because there are policies on the book every place that people don't pay attention to. They're just there. It's like, how do I start to create a culture by modeling the behavior? So I really make an effort to say, how do I model this behavior and not just talk about it? So like I said, just having this person come like, Faculty Staff Institute, here's your opening speaker. That had never been done before. But I'm sending a message when I'm doing it. I'm giving them information, but I'm sending a message, clear message to say, this is important and we're going to have these conversations. Or, it's like I met Jody Patterson at one of the summer institutes we had, and I was like, all right, you're going to have to come and do something for our students. And the schedules got screwed up, and so I was out of town, but she came. We're going to have this conversation about, you have a parent of a trans student. What is that like? She had a chance to interact with people. That's how I can model that behavior and make sure it stays on our agenda and not just have it disappear in a policy. So that's sort of been my bent. I want to show it more than just say, let's do a nice little policy and then tuck it away.
And for folks who don't know, Jody Patterson is the co-chair of our board of directors at the Human Rights Campaign that Dr. Kimbrough was referencing. So you're talking about the commitment that you certainly have to do this work. What do you say to other HBCU leaders who may not be as far along as you, or who may actually be resistant to learning about LGBTQ inclusion work?
Yeah, so I think that we're having a sea change in HBCU leadership. When I became president of Philander Smith in Little Rock 16 years ago, I was 37. So in many ways, I'm the first college president from the hip hop generation. So it was a different mindset for me. And I'm watching a lot of younger presidents come in that are very open, different experiences. So I think some of it's generational, is not the old school approach where, they're still thinking office hours is, 2 hours a week on Friday afternoon. I'm like, man, we're in a social media world. I got students texting me, sending tweets, all of that kind of stuff. It's like, man, y'all can hang up that, office hours now as a student, like during the pandemic. Hey, can we talk today? All right, let's set up a Zoom. That's what we do now. So we're trying to move and do things differently. And so I see, I'm getting on the older side now. I'm seeing a newer generation of presidents that are much more willing to embrace that. So some of it is time. So there's some more retirements that have to happen, that will happen. There's going to be a new generation of leaders that come in that have a more holistic view of what their job is and what HBCU should be addressing. So I'm hopeful that that's going to change it. You just got to have some retirements. And I think that's what we're going to have. But I've been very impressed with some of, my younger colleagues who are doing, I think, some progressive things in this space. So it seems like it's slow, but I see the difference.
Now, do you think that there's something tangible that you would do, or we as the Human Rights Campaign should do, when we are engaging with leaders at HBCUs who may not retire right away or may just be resistant to LGBTQ inclusion? Is there something that you found was persuasive, impactful as you engaged with leaders who may not be as embracive of LGBTQ people?
No, I think to push to say we need to have these conversations. I think to get those students to say we want to have these conversations. If we're committed to the overall health and well-being of our students, we need to understand those students' experiences as well. So I think that, but I mean, once again, I saw a colleague who wrote a piece, not that I know of, I don't think we have an openly gay HBCU president right now. Now, whether we have a gay president or not, I don't know. But we don't have an open
That's a key distinction. That is a key distinction.
Right. So if, that would go a long way to have an openly gay HBCU president. There are other presidents who are, but we haven't gotten into that space yet. So we still got some growth that needs to be done. We need to do, but I think, looking at some campuses where there are some issues, to work with those students collaboratively, to even get some colleagues, to say, well, are you willing to have a conversation? We got a colleague here that you could talk to, and we want to have these conversations. I think that's a way to do it too. So I think you got to press a little bit. I don't think there's any problem with that, to say, you could really do some, I think, good things on this campus if you address this population as well. Because I think my goal is to really create a campus, going back to the policy piece, where students, no matter what their sexual orientation is, they feel like this is their campus and they can be engaged, any kind of way. In the video, Akeem was in the video, he ran for Mr. Dillard and he lost, but it was really close. So to me, that said a lot about our student. It wasn't like a big gap. It was close. It was students saying, and he ran against somebody who was very, very popular. To be that close says, okay, students, are able to accept people. We normally have we've had a number of our class kings that have been openly gay. Those are good things. So I want a student, if they're gay, they can do anything they want to on this campus. I want to create that kind of environment, and it's not this kind of stigma. So I still think there's work that we can do, but I mean, I've seen some really good, evidence of work here at Dillard, but I think we got to push other people as well. So that's, like I said, that's when I become an ally in a different kind of sense, to say, all right, we need to work with these folks. Do you know President X, Y, and Z? Can you help us, do X? That's my job too. I got to work with you to help. If I really am concerned about this, I need to be leaning on some of my brother and sister presidents to do better.
Well, you've been doing a great job at Dillard, and you referenced health equity earlier in the conversation and where we are now with COVID-19. And COVID-19, as you know, prior to COVID-19, the health outcomes for LGBTQ people in the South were already dire, particularly as it relates to HIV/AIDS. So COVID-19 has laid bare sort of the inequity that we see in our healthcare system. At Dillard, you have been a leader in addressing healthy sexual practices for all students. And I want you to talk a little bit about how you could potentially adapt your health advocacy work moving forward, given the new reality that we live in COVID-19.
I don't know. I mean, one of the things I wanted to do when I first got here was we did this at Philander Smith. And so once again, let me add that context. I've served as president of 2 church-related HBCUs. Dillard is connected with the United Methodist Church and the United Church of Christ, Philander Smith, the United Methodist Church. Prior to COVID, if COVID had not happened, this summer, the United Methodist Church would have split over the issue of LGBTQ issues. Okay, so that you see the level of complication that I have, where you have a denomination that eventually will split, because you got these traditionalists that won't conduct ceremonies, that won't ordain ministers. Okay, so I got all that in there. So when I was at Philander, I was like, we have issues in terms of healthy sexual behavior as a whole. And I think we started thinking about wellness as a whole there, but that was part of it. I was like, there are some white schools that do a sex week. We should do a sex week. But that's almost sacrilegious to say you got this HBCU that's doing a sex week. But this was, so I'm telling our board about this, and some people were uneasy, okay? But on our board, we have former Surgeon General Joycelyn Elders, United Methodist, Philander Smith grad. And of course, she got in trouble talking about all kinds of, sexual issues. So when you have her in the board meeting, like, yes, this is great, In fact, I have some contacts at Trojan. I'm gonna get them to send the condoms. So what are they gonna say? I got Joyce and Elder saying we're gonna do this. I mean, that ended that. So we did some of those kind of activities here as well, and made sure it was broad enough so that everything wasn't just about heterosexual relationships. And so to really keep trying to expand that. Now, of course, that makes some students, uncomfortable. How do we have those conversations as well? But we're able to still do that. But it is part of this broader understanding our health as a whole. I think the pandemic has, with the health disparities, it has exacerbated that, but it's shown a light on it. But then I think to start digging in with other populations. How does this disproportionately impact LGBTQ populations, maybe even more so? What does that mean for them? And I'm not hearing a whole lot of that. Right now it's just based on the race, and we're not really dealing with LGBTQ issues with that as a whole. So I think that's got to be a part of it. So I think we've got to think very holistically about health. I think this is a key demographic to think about how we do that. What are the options? I remember one of our students this past year, he really wanted to figure out how does Dillard get involved in providing prep? And he was sending me emails late at night. He wanted me to be at the meeting. And I was like, look, the medical director's going, he was upset with me. I was like, I ain't got to be at every meeting. I think part of my problem with my students, they know I like to really engage them. I'm like, dude, I'm emailing you at 11 o'clock at night. Okay, this is but just because I knew that was a concern, it was like, well, we got to figure it out. Talk to our chief physician. Let's have a conversation. So there's still ways that they push me and I push back. But that's a part of being engaged. To say, yeah, this is an issue. How do we address that? So I think it's being open to have the conversations. Where are the needs, and how do we best address those needs? And so I think that's what I try to do, is have that conversation. But I think we just really tipped the scale in terms of dealing with LGBTQ issues related to COVID, at least from my perspective.
Okay, I want to talk. You've now referenced this twice, and so I want to ask a question about the church. And you have been affiliated with two institutions that have a history with religion and the church. Recent studies show that the majority of religious-based individuals that would classify themselves as religious-driven support LGBTQ equality. I want to talk to you a little bit about your experiences, both positive and negative, about the impact that the church, and specifically the Black church, has had on the lives of LGBTQ people, and specifically Black LGBTQ people.
Right.
Can you just talk about your experiences and your perspective of being affiliated with the Black church, working in institutions that are affiliated with religious institutions, and how that's informed your trajectory doing this work? Right.
So, as I said, my father's a United Methodist minister. He finally retired last month. He retired in 2006 when my daughter was born, because there was a mandatory retirement for United Methodist, but they kept bringing him out to do other things. And part of the reason was he pastored two of the largest Black United Methodist churches in Atlanta. I mean, growing churches to over 7,000 members. So, anybody who comes to Atlanta, politicians, everybody went to Cascade United Methodist. That's the church. So growing up in that church, you see all the stereotypes about, church and gospel music and the choirs and the prevalence of particularly gay men, to talk about that. So, but I think people probably see it, don't make a big deal. It depends on the church. He didn't really, that wasn't a part of his preaching style to talk about those issues. Even though I've heard lots of preachers. I've heard preachers when I lived in Little Rock. Somebody go with the old, Adam and Steve deal. And I was like, this was within the last 10 years. I was like, is this dude really doing this today? You still got some people who hold those kind of ideas about religion. And sometimes people focus on, that part of sexuality and not the other parts of sexuality that might be damning to them, which is just still it's just really interesting to see that. But in our church at Cascade, there was a couple, two men, interracial couple, who sang in a chancel choir. And so you sort of got to watch this healthy relationship of these men, interracial, very active in this large, predominantly Black church. And it said a lot for how you watch how people engage them, how they engage people. So that was just another thing that I saw sort of growing up. You were just like, so you had a different perspective. You saw that was out there, and I thought that was really good. But that's still something that we got these real old school church views that people don't want to deal with. There's a documentary, I looked it up, it came in '96, called All God's Children. And it talks about the relationship between African Americans and the Black church. Yes. I was working at Old Dominion from '97 to 2000, and the director of multicultural affairs, she played a video for one of the programs she was doing. And in that video, there's a powerful segment from Cornel West. And he was like, when is the church going to get away from the Kool-Aid of homophobia and really deal with the blood of Jesus? He said, because the blood is thick and it's nourishing, and Kool-Aid is watery, it's thin. I was like, Cornel West he tore that up for me. I was like, to me, that made a lot of sense. We're dealing with this homophobia. It's thin, it's weak. Let's deal with the nourishment. What is the church really about? What should we be doing? So I think you're seeing, once again, some movement in the church. I've felt that I've had some, cover to really dive into these issues because I'm a lifelong United Methodist. My father is pastor of prominent churches. So I've never been afraid to say, I don't care if this is a church-related institution. We're going to deal with these issues. What are y'all going to do? I've never worried about, like I said, I think it's Joycelyn Elder's fault being at Philander because she's like, I'm calling Trojan and blah, blah. And there were people at the table who were nervous about that. It was sort of like, wait, should we be having a sex week? And you got some alums out there. What are y'all doing? Sex week? No, we're talking about broader health issues, and we're including everything. So I think that's given me, a different additional level of cover. But I think that's still is an issue for us. I think it's getting better in the Black church. But I think there's still pockets of people who hold those really just old school, archaic, which is why the church is dying, because we're not reaching out to people. They feel like it's not speaking to them. So you see these churches that are dying because we haven't progressed with the times.
So, Doctor, you have a lot of LGBTQ students or prospective students at Dillard or other HBCUs who might be tuning in right now. What is your one message to them? I guess I would say they should find places that they feel comfortable where they can be themselves. They can see themselves in leadership roles, being highlighted and lifted up as a representative of that institution. I mean, if you're really old school, there are probably some people you won't highlight. I mean, I use an example. We got connected, with Jericho Brown. The day he found out that he won the Pulitzer Prize, he sent me an email. He was like, Brother President, I want you to know this. So I'm posting this on everything, and I'm thinking, 40 years ago, would a president of Dillard be out there say, I got this gay alum who just won a Pulitzer, or would I just sort of downplay it? I'm like, I'll put him out there like, this could be you. And he's talking about his relationships. And I want to lift that up as much as possible because I want students to see that they can be successful. And he was here at a time that probably isn't as light as it is now. But I want them to feel like, I can be who I want to be here. I can be successful. People are going to accept me. They're going to support me and love me. And so they got to find places where that's a good fit. I tell that for all students, find a place that's a good fit, but particularly for LGBTQ students, what's the climate like? Are there things that we can improve? And like I said, Dillard, there are things that we can improve. We can keep doing more, but I think we're open to have those conversations and to be critical of ourselves and to keep looking for new ways to be inclusive and then to celebrate, times that we do a good job. And I think there are a lot of times we do a good job. Yes. Well, first, huge shout out to Jericho Brown, who is a friend, and he's absolutely fantastic. And second, we have a student for you, Dr. Kimbrough, Jodeci Ashford, who is a student at Southern University at NAM and A&M College. Jodeci, I think, is on. Thank you so much for joining us. I think you might have a question or two for Dr. Kimbrough, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, Dr. Kimbrough. Thank you for having me. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I was a participant of the HRC 2019 National Summit. And it was basically life-changing. I definitely think it was. And I can say as a Southern leader, I took that back to my university. And my question to you is that, can you share what are the steps that you have taken to create a safe and inclusive space or the policies for transgender and non-binary students?
Right, very good. So we started, so a couple of years ago, we created a work team. We didn't get as much, I mean, this year was crazy anyway. We didn't get as much done, but we created a work team to bring together key people and to start looking at some of those issues. And we did look particularly in terms of policies for transgender students. We've had a couple of times where we thought students were coming, but they didn't come. So we really haven't had a real immersion of a student to really test out how our policies work for those students. I mean, we've done some of your basic things, and you can have unisex bathrooms and those kinds of things, but I think we still need to be able to, have some students that we can, double check to see are faculty members asking people, what do you want to be called? Are you finding out about pronouns? Those are the kinds of things that I don't think we've tested our system enough to know if we're really doing a good enough job. So I can't answer if we've done a good enough job. We really need some folks to come and live as a student with that as their reality. And then for us to sort of see, where are we? That's, I think, the only way we know we can get better. So we need trans students to sort of see how we're doing in terms of creating a space that's safe and welcoming and affirming for them.
So Dr. Kimbrough, as we think about COVID-19 and going into this school year starting in September, you've had an opportunity to interface with students for a long time before COVID-19. Now that you're interfacing with prospective students that are thinking about Dillard or other universities, are you seeing a different approach to which colleges and universities students are thinking about, at least with respect to Dillard, how they're approaching Dillard now as opposed to before COVID-19?
Yeah, man, that's a really good question. I mean, like everyone, we're doing a lot of virtual conversations. I think for a place like Dillard, I think it probably hurts us a little bit because our strength is when people get on this beautiful campus and they can feel, how we interact with people, that sells it. I mean, so now we've got to make sure we're able to, we'll know when we see the class that comes in for the fall, are we able to make that same kind of sale virtually like this? And I think it's harder, but when you're here and you're walking on the campus and you see the oak trees and all of that, it puts you in this mindset. So now you got this picture that's painted and you're like, I can see myself here. And then you feel people and they're talking to you. And then we've had students say, I toured your campus to talk to people, and I went some other places, I didn't get the same feel. I was like, that's what we do well. So now we're trying to figure out, and we'll learn, have we done a good job translating that in a virtual environment? I think we tried to find different ways to, engage students, to do different organizations or groups or programs, having their separate Zoom sessions for incoming students, ways to continue to engage present students. So we're doing, like I said, I don't think what we're doing is any different than anybody else in this environment. Everybody's experimenting to figure out ways, but I just know for us, one of our real strengths, and when we talk to students about why they chose Dillard, we know for us, our big selling point is when they step on and they can just feel it, it's palpable. So now we're trying to figure out if we're able to do that effectively in this kind of format. So we're learning to see if how effective we've been with that. It's gonna be interesting to see.
And then I have a final question for you, and you may have questions for me, but if you don't, this will be our closing question, and it's about curriculums. Do you think that HBCUs can do more to teach about the contributions of Black LGBTQ people? Black LGBTQ people have made tremendous contributions to the arts, to politics, history, our movement. And as we think about history, the most important thing about history is who's teaching it. And when we think about who's teaching it, we look at the context and what is being taught. And LGBTQ inclusive curriculum and programming is so critically important. Can you talk a little bit more about how HBCUs can be more active, more aggressive in making sure that Black LGBTQ people are reflected in our curriculums? Are they reflected as we talk about history?
Yes. I think, once again, those are those conversations we set from the top that we ask ourselves, just like you would at a majority institution. Black students are saying, I want to see myself in the curriculum. So LGBTQ students want to see themselves at a curriculum no matter where they are as well. So particularly for HBCUs, I mean, you've got these natural high profile people like a Bayard Rustin who attended HBCUs, architect the, civil rights and the March on Washington. I don't think we lift him up enough. I really don't. I mean, he's a complex figure. You could have a course on Bayard Rustin, So I think those are the kinds of things that we don't think about. And you could do a separate course, but you could also just work those. And I think here, our humanities, I know they do a good job doing that anyway. So they have a really strong viewpoint that they're bringing in people. But are we doing that, in other areas to make sure people know if I'm, teaching in this area, this field of psychology, that this person, this scholar, LGBTQ, this is what they focus on. This is their research. Are we working that in there? If we talk about in the sciences, are there people that we would highlight? For me, at least once a year, I've done it twice, but it's usually too much. At least once a year, I do a class on hip hop, sex, gender, and ethical behavior. And I always have a segment where I want to deal with LGBTQ issues, because particularly in hip hop, people don't think about it. And there's a local hip hop artist. His name is Fly Young Red. He's done my class twice. We were online this time by the time he got to class. Very engaging young guy. I mean, his videos, you can see he's making a video for a specific population. And so even for our students, if they're watching this video where they sort of think what a hip hop video looks like, and you see the same kind of video, but everybody in that video is male, they're trying to figure out what does this mean? So to have those conversations with people like him, or we're in New Orleans, so Big Frida's been to class, and have those conversations. So I always make sure that if we're going to talk about sex and gender, how can you not talk about LGBTQ and hip hop? So it's always a very popular so I'll make sure I work that in. So once again, it's for me modeling that. It's not just saying, all right, faculty, make sure you're talking about these issues. It's like, no, it's part of my curriculum. That's I'm very intentional about doing that. So I really believe in modeling that and to look for those learning opportunities. But I think we've probably scratched the surface on the kinds of things that we can do to be much more inclusive and to highlight, people. So hopefully we'll continue to do more of that. I think at HBCUs, I don't think we can give ourselves a pass. I think we want to look at, a variety of people in terms of the voices that we present and show to our students, and then give them ideas that they can go and learn more on their own. But I think we got to introduce these people in these various roles and these various identities and realities to the students so that they can see themselves in that work. I think that's important.
Dr. Walter Kimbrough, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For those that are watching, if you want to learn more about the Human Rights Campaign's HBCU programs, please text 472-472. It should be at the bottom of the screen. And you will get a lot of information about the program. It started in 2004, and it is expanding to as many universities and colleges that we can expand it to. Dr. Kimbrough, is there anything else that you would like to add before we close?
No, once again, I was looking forward to this. I was excited to be able to have this conversation. I hope we can continue to have these conversations because I think it's important. And even just for me, just to think about, okay, so what are some things I need to be doing for this year? So it's just even a good reminder for myself to say, all right, so what else could we be doing? I think that's healthy. I think you have to just keep assessing and stay on your toes. So for me, it's not just, I'm thinking out loud, I'm talking about my experiences, but I'm also thinking about, well, what else could we do? What could we do something different? So now the wheels are spinning. So that's good for me. So that's a benefit for me. I feel like I've benefited from having this opportunity to talk out loud. So I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Dr. Walter Kimbrough, thank you for being a leader. Thank you for questioning. Thank you for being inclusive. Thank you for pushing the envelope. And thank you for treating all students equally, which is ultimately the goal. We want to make sure that young people can go to colleges and universities and that they're treated the same, that they're treated with dignity and respect, that they're treated with all of the inclusive energy that we tend to assign to our family and to our friends. We want to make sure that when someone leaves their home for the first time and they go to a college or university, that they receive that level of dignity and respect. LGBTQ students should be treated with that same level of dignity and respect. And we have a leader here, Dr. Kimbrough, who's been doing it for more than 20 years. I want to thank him again for joining us. Thank Leslie Hall for leading our HBCU program. And thank you all for watching us today.